Hey, what's up, Scott Balkan here with Imagination Creation Films, and today we spot the new king. Sorry, didn't mean to make light of it. Well, this is actually part one of two, with this episode covering the review portion and the second episode going through the several use cases. Sadly, due to some schedule conflicts, I wasn't able to have the use cases ready for this release, so I decided to split it up. Full disclosure, Aputure did send me this light, but not for review. They really just wanted to know what I thought about it. They said, you can do whatever you want. And well, after putting it through its paces and me being me, I'm gonna just go ahead and review it anyway. Aputure, if you're watching, this is what I think. Now, I'm not gonna give you a history of how we got here. I've done that many times in the past. And the truth is, this was just the next step. Actually, try it, bleep, but there is a king of flexibility, durability, and capability out there in our world, the Arri M18. A light virtually everyone knows well because it just works. This is the king of daylight for indie productions, and for good reason. It's built like a tank, it never complains, and it delivers sunlight where none existed before. So a little bit about the challenger here, the Aputure 1200D. It's a 1200 watt COB LED hard light that consumes a total of 1440 watts from the wall. Now, for those of you who enjoy math, that's exactly enough to pair it with a Aputure Nova P300C on a single circuit. Now, this is cool because now you can not only get that great morning sunlight through a window, but you can add in that wonderful Rayleigh scattering that happens with sunlight. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this, that's what makes the sky blue. It's what makes the clouds at sunset appear orange and red and all those other pretty colors. That shows up inside a window in real life. So duplicating that extra color really sells the sunlight. So being able to do that on one residential circuit becomes a wonderful thing. Back to the light. Now, the light comes with 3 reflectors, and you can use it without a reflector, and that gives you 4 fields of view, 15, 30, 45, and 66 without a reflector. Now, Aputure has stated that yes, you can use the F10 Fresnel on this light, giving you a 15 to 45 degree field of view, and it's variable. But understand, it wasn't designed for this light, and it doesn't give the same boost in output as it does on the 600D. Let me explain why. A Fresnel is just a lens, and a lens is designed to focus on a specific area. If you compare the size of the COB of the 600D to the 1200D, the 600D is smaller in diameter. Think of it like a camera sensor. There are Super 35 APS-C sensors and full frame. There are Super 35 lenses that are designed to work with those smaller sensors, and there are lenses designed to work with full frame. If you were to put a Super 35 lens on a full frame, yes, it would work, but you're going to have vignetting on the sides and the corner, etc. It's the same thing that happens when you put the F10 on the 1200D. It works, but because all the COB isn't covered by the Fresnel, you'll get less output. So yes, you can use it. Yes, it will get hot. No, it won't melt. And it just increases the output by about 1.2 times. It's not quite the same as on the 600D. That includes an extremely well-built flexible head cable measuring 7.5 meters or just over 24 feet for those of us in the US that use standards of measurements based on whatever we see. And for those of you in rural America, it measures in at exactly 111 tomatoes. Power options are the Nutric PowerCon AC power cable. One is included and it's 6 meters long, just under 20 feet for the US, and for rural America, just under 7 hay bales long. I get to joke about the rural America because, well, I live in it. You know, my internet. Yeah. You can use 48-volt battery connections to power the unit. To use it in full power, you'll need to connect 2 48-volt 15-amp connections. Only using one will limit you to half power. And it can be controlled with Sidus Link, DMX512, ArtNet, and SACN via Ethercon or Lumen Radio CRMX. And it has a built-in LCD screen with built-in light sensor to brighten or dim the display according to the ambient light conditions. Now, it has a standard Bowens mount on the front, and well, to be honest, we're reaching the limits of what that mount can do with this light. But you can still use all your favorite approved light modifiers on this light. And sadly, no, you can't use the Aputure spotlight attachment. You can use the head in any orientation without fear of cooling. You can adjust the angle of the light with a single yoke lock. Speaking of cooling, the 1200D has an active cooling, and no, you should not use this anywhere near audio. The fan is very noticeable. It's not a hairdryer, but it's not as quiet as the 600D, and some don't like how loud the 600D is. You can adjust it. It does have some settings for the fan, so if you're not using it at full strength, you can cut your fan down, and it would be fine with like a 600D would. But at full blast, no. Now, the light comes in two cases, one for the light and one for the reflectors. Now, if you're crafty, you can squeeze all of it in one case, but it won't be as protected. And keep in mind, if you dent or misshape your reflectors in any way, they will not work the same and not look right. They need to be round. They were designed specifically to be round, so pack carefully. Now, mounting the light is also another thing to keep in mind. This is a junior pin only light, like the Nova P600C. You must use a combo stand, and for good reason. You don't want something small and lightweight holding this light up. You want a solid stand. Now, as for output, it's bright. Now, it's comparable with the M18 with an 1800 watt bulb all day long. It fluctuates either side depending on which reflector you're using, but it's right there with the M18 with the 1800, so it's bright. So now that we've talked about the Challenger, let's just see how the new Aputure 1200D fares against the King. So in the first category, we have build quality and durability. The M18, it's built like a tank. It's a tried and true design. It's simple, it's elegant, it's blue. And it's seen on sets everywhere in the world since 2009. Now, the M18 ballast and head weigh in at just under 37 pounds in total. The 1200D, well, this thing is built like a tank. It's got solid construction. It's simple, it's elegant, it's not blue. And the 1200D weighs in at just under 33 pounds. So who wins this category? Well, it's a tie. They're both really solidly built, and although the Aputure weighs less, it isn't a lot of weight, so it's not a clear and concise winner here. It's a tie, it's a draw. So the next category, flexibility. Now, the M18 is an open-faced light, and it has an adjustable beam spread from spot to wide, about 15 to 58 degrees, and it's completely adjustable in between. Now, it's only rated for IP23, so try not to get it wet. It can handle a tiny amount, but not much water at all. You need to cover it. Now, the 1200D is also open-faced and has an adjustable beam angle from 11 to 66 degrees in 4 steps using reflectors. Now, with the F10 Fresnel, you do get 15 to 45 degrees, but, I mean, you're not going to get that boosted output. Now, the light is not IP certified, but it is water and dust resistant, meaning try not to get it wet, but if it rains, you have a little bit of time to cover it without fear. Now, who wins this category? Well, it's kind of a tie here too, but for different reasons. The M18 is a little more flexible with its beam adjustment in that you don't have to swap reflectors to change the angle. With the 1200, you do. But then on the other hand, the Aputure is more weather resistant, so that's something. I think they're a pretty good match here, and we're going to call that a draw. Let's move on to the next category, capability. The M18. You can only dim an M18 down from 100% to 50%. It will not go lower. You'll be using scrims after that. The 1200D, dimming down to 0.1%. But in fairness, it feels more like about 3 to 5%. That initial 0 to 0.1, it's kind of a big jump. So I'm going to say it's about 3 to 5% and then up. Now, also, a word of caution here. Aputure does a really good job with its dimming circuit, with one exception. Very high frame rates. And when you're shooting over, say, about 240 frames per second, depending on your shutter angle. Now, if you're doing 180 degrees, it's not a problem. When you're talking like 22 degrees or 11 degrees, that's when this will show up. And I found you should run the light at 100% and scrim the light output as necessary. And this is due to the way the dimmer affects those frequencies in the output. Now, yes, there is an adjustable frequency on this light, and it can help, but it's best just run it at 100% and scrim. And then it's good and clean up to 2,000 frames per second. Winner in this category, I have to give this to Aputure because sometimes you just need to run at under 49% or below. And unless you're shooting high speed, then the capability is matched, but the heat output of the Aputure is 33% less than the M18. So it still goes to Aputure here, but it's not huge. It's just tilting the scale a little bit that way. Now let's go to ease of use and care. The M18, you have to change bulbs every 750 hours or less. It has a 15-minute startup, and honestly, you should let it settle for about 30 minutes to get good color out of it. Now with the M18, you can't hot restrike, meaning you have to let it rest powered off for 15 minutes before you can turn the light back on. This is due to the limitations in the bulb technology or HMI technology. Speaking of, HMI bulbs contain hazardous chemicals and materials that have to be replaced every 750 hours. This leads to some toxic waste having to be disposed of carefully and properly. And don't miss replacing the bulb as scheduled, or the bulb could explode on you. It does happen. Now, care must be taken to make sure that UV radiation doesn't escape from the HMI fixtures either. Using a cheap bulb or using a bulb that has part of its coatings removed or scratched could expose you to some bad UV rays. Now, that's not a very nice thing to do to your actors. Now, keep in mind though, if you follow all the rules with the M18, it can absolutely be used safely. Don't get me wrong. The 1200D is expected to last 50,000 hours and requires only a minute or so for good practice to warm up. It actually turns on instantly, but yeah. With the 1200D, you can hot restrike with no issues, no waiting. Just power off, power back on, no problem. The LEDs don't contain any hazardous chemicals and don't need to be changed, so waste here isn't really a problem. There isn't any hazardous UV radiation emitted from a 1200D either, so that isn't an issue. So in the end of this segment, the 1200D really comes out ahead here. And this is the power and flexibility of LED technology and what we've all been waiting for really anyway. So at this point, yeah, the Aputure is ahead, but I wouldn't say they've won the game or even call it a home run. Sure, the bases are loaded and there's no outs. So, one good hit could really change the game and unseat the king. And well, a little foreshadowing right here should clue you in. Let's move to the cost of ownership. The M18 costs $14,500, has a $500 bulb that needs to be replaced every 750 hours on average. And it has an initial color temperature of 6,000 degrees Kelvin and a CRI of greater than 90. HMI bulbs tend to drop in color temperature about 1 degree Kelvin every hour of use. Now, this can cause a loss in color accuracy and temperature over time, and thus, that's why it has a short usable bulb lifespan. So a fresh bulb will be closer to 6,000 degrees Kelvin, and an aged bulb will be closer to 5,200. Now, that's a long section there to talk about the cost of ownership, but I want you to understand why you have to replace those bulbs, not to mention the fact that they will fail. The Aputure 1200D costs just $3,390. Color temperature comes in at 5,660 K, and that's metered with love by Phil Holland. CRI comes in at 96 on R9, and TLCI hits 98. Again, metered with love by Phil Holland. Thanks, Phil. LEDs do shift color temperature over time as well, but it's not as fast. The 1200D is expected to drop about 680 degrees Kelvin over its lifetime. Again, that lifetime is 50,000 hours, meaning if you operated the head 24/7, it would last 5.7 years and only drop 680 degrees Kelvin. So you're likely to not see much drift at all. Now, the winner here is pretty clear, and by quite a lot, and that's the 1200D. But I want to dive into this a little further to help understand the value here. The M18, if used 3 days a week, 10 hours a day, 25 weeks a year, which admittedly, it's a busy light, over 2 years, what would the total cost of ownership look like? Well, $14,500 for the light kit, $1,000 for bulbs. Yes, you'd have to replace the bulb twice during this time. The total cost of ownership, $15,500 over 2 years. The Aputure, $3,390 for the kit, $0 for bulbs. Total cost of ownership over 2 years, $3,390. Let's take it even a step further. Rental. And I go here because the M18, it's typically rented because of that higher price to get into it. But if you wanted to buy these lights and rent them out when not in use, this is what it might look like. And these prices may vary based on your region, so take them with a grain of salt and flexibility. M18s currently rent for about $125 a day. The M18 would pay for itself in 124 rental days, or a little over 1.2 years. Total cost of ownership, over the 2 years, it's a net profit of $3,000. That's pretty reasonable return of investment of about 19.35%, or about 9.25% a year. It's not earth-shattering, but it is a return. Now, compare that to the 1200D. It currently rents for $150 a day. It would pay for itself in 23 rental days, or 4 months. Total profit over 2 years, $19,000. That's a return on investment of 560%, or 157% a year. Of course, your rental mileage may vary, so don't take this as gospel. It's more of a conversation. We're in a business, but let's say you don't rent your gear out. Cool, but have you been renting gear? How many rentals of an M18 does it take to equal one 1200D? It's 28. Yeah, 28 rentals. So after 28, that $125 a day rental fee for the M18 goes back in your pocket. And that's why this light is so fundamentally powerful. Here's the deal. The 1200D isn't for everyone. This light isn't for content creators. It isn't for run and gun filmmaking. It isn't really for the corporate shooter. This is for productions bigger than that, where large amounts of light are needed to fill a large amount of space or create contrasty sunny looks that used to require a lot of money. As an indie production, well, you already own a camera. You already own some lights. You wouldn't be watching this video otherwise. I mean, come on. This light is for you. Now, we typically have a little money, but we can't tie up $15,000 in a light that we use a few times a year. So we rent what we can't afford, and rightly so. That is the correct solution. But now there's an option. The Aputure 1200D, it's a big light that is going to change how you could run your business. If you rent an M18 several times a year, this instantly becomes a decision you should look deep into. The 1200D from Aputure is a rental light you can finally afford to own. Now, what are the pros and cons? Pros, it's a powerful, serious light with a ton of output. It can run on a single 15 amp household circuit and have a little extra power to spare, 360 watts, for a smaller light. It uses standard Bowens mount for compatibility with many modifiers, and it is a very affordable high output light for what it is. Cons, fan noise. It's louder than any other Aputure light. Be aware. The negative, it's kind of a dichotomy here, but the cost, it can place it out of reach of some. It's not overpriced at all. It's actually really cheap. It's just a cost that will make it difficult for some to justify. And they should rent until they can justify it. That's why the rental market is so important. You have to change the reflectors to change the beam angle. It's another negative, but we're used to that anyway. So what do you think about this light? Are you planning on adding 1 or 3 to your kit, or are you just going to continue to rent? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd really love to know what you think about this light and what you think about them in general. Now remember, you can support the channel with any affiliate links down below or become a channel member. I appreciate each and every one of you and, well, anybody that helps support and every subscriber and all of you. I appreciate all of you. Wow, that sounded really bad when I said that. I'm sorry. Well, as always, as I like to leave it, don't let your passions center around your life. Let your life center around your passions.